Well, greetings fellow dwarfers. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Series 2 episode, Better Than Life. This is a really interesting episode because it's quite different to everything that's gone before, in that there's a lot, this episode makes extensive use of location shooting. So they got out of the studio and did a load of stuff out and about, which was good and bad, as we'll come to. The weather kind of played its part. So without any further ado, let's dive in and take a look. The opening gag for this week is that Holly's really pleased to be 60 billion miles away from the nearest Burny Inn. We then join Rimmer and Lister in the bunk room discussing Rimmer's awful meal that he'd cooked. We then hear various funny accounts of how bad that food was, and that the cat is now sleeping off the stomach pump. Rimmer starts making the usual excuses that he's just a dead guy and he's a hologram made entirely of light. To which Lister says, "You've got the Scutters to help you." Rimmer says, they're completely useless, they don't do what I say, or rather they do what he says, but they take it literally and they're no use at all. Now, we saw something like this when I did my breakdown of the episode Body Snatcher, which was kind of a bonus episode made up of storyboards. I did a breakdown of that, it was really interesting, and in there was a whole scene of Rimmer kind of losing his rag, trying to teach the Scutters to write, losing his rag with them, causing them to sort of hit each other and blow up. But it all had kind of a similar thought to this, that the Scutters are really hard for Rimmer to work with. Or should that perhaps be that Rimmer is really hard for the Scutters to have to work with? Interestingly, Lister says that the Scutters have got no emotions, but that's pretty much proven untrue. They have some sort of emotion, because Rimmer says about them being obsessed with John Wayne, having loads of John Wayne posters and Film Fun magazines in their storage locker. So they've obviously developed some sort of emotions because they've chosen a type of movie that they like. They like cowboy and Indian films, which is actually something we saw briefly in the episode Balance of Power. When Rimmer is out looking for Lister around the ship, he comes across the Scutters pretending to be cleaning in the cinema, but actually they're just sat watching a cowboy film. Holly appears on the screen and wants the guys to guess his news, which of course, how on earth can they do that without even a clue? It turns out his news is that the post pod has arrived. It's been tracking him from Earth, and for 3 million years it's been trying to catch up with them, and now it finally has. Now, what's really cool about this is there's no reason not to think that more post pods might not also arrive in the future as more catch up with the ship, which we finally saw 20 odd years later in the Series 10 episode Dear Dave. So the guys head off to go look at their post. Along the way they come across the Scutters dressed up, playing a game of Cowboys and Indians. The guys check out their mail in the drive room, and we hear about a new batch of movies, which includes Friday the 13th episode, or part 1649, and we hear about them remaking Casablanca for what must be at least the 3rd time in Red Dwarf. Lister then comes across a copy of Better Than Life, a new type of game, which Lister has a lot of information retained about. He says that electrodes are inserted into your frontal lobes and hypothalamus, so you actually feel as if you're really there. That's a lot of information and big words for Lister to have retained. We then see a video of the 11th generation AI, Gordon, who apparently has an IQ of 8,000. He's playing postal chess with Holly, and this is the first move. Except, despite having an IQ 2,000 points higher than Holly's, he sounds even dimmer. Is this just a fault with 11th generation AI? In the bunk room, Lister is sorting through his piles of mail, to which Rimmer just says it's all junk mail and sort of jokes about, getting sent useless things like a walrus polishing kit. Lister then finds a letter from the Outland Revenue demanding tax of 8,500, presumably £pounds. It's a really fun little gag because it turns out to not be for Lister, it's a letter for Rimmer. Now, almost this entire joke is pulled almost directly, almost word for word, from the Dave Hollins Space Cadet episode, Norweb. Lister then finds another letter for Rimmer, this one from his mother, written with very bad handwriting. The letter informs him that his father is dead. Well, dead. We then join the boys in the Observation Dome. This is a new set built for Series 2, and it's a chroma keyed set, so it would have been a blue background when originally filmed. It's a really nice little set that puts him in a different location, surrounded by the stars, a great sort of space for contemplation, very quiet looking. It's a nice little set, and we get a nice, very, very different kind of moment. The comedy sort of dies down a little bit, and we get a more quiet moment between Lister and Rimmer, as Lister talks about when his dad died. Now, it's done with comedy, and there is jokes in there, but it sort of ebbs and flows but keeps the mood a bit lower. It's a really nice little scene. Rimmer then talks about the emotions of now hearing that his father has passed away, even though he knew that everybody on Earth had already died. But then the tension is broken when Rimmer says that he absolutely hated his father. So it's really well done. This is classic Red Dwarf, where a little bit of moodiness comes in and then the jokes come and break the tension. It's really well done. Great scene. Gradually things get a bit more serious again, with Rimmer wishing that his dad had just once said that he was proud of him, before the cat turns up and again breaks the tension, singing "My stomach's pumped and now I'm hungry," a funny way to remind us of the terrible meal from earlier. We then join Rimmer sometime later watching the videotape of Earth News. This is from Channel 27, groovy Channel 27, which is so sort of hip and moving that it even has a hologrammatic newsreader. We actually heard about this in a previous episode when the guys were discussing successful dead people, successful holograms, and they talked about groovy, funky Channel 27.
Channel 27 have a hologram reading the news?
Oh, groovy, funky Channel 27.
We get some weird, silly sounding news before the cat and Lister arrive, interrupt, and say that they're going to go play that game, Better Than Life, and that Holly can key Rimmer into it. Rimmer is still upset and doesn't want to go join them, so continues watching the news until an article comes on talking about how great Better Than Life is, to which he just rushes off to join the guys. In the drive room, the guys gear up to play with what are quite clearly some bicycle helmets spray painted green with some little lights added, but they kind of do the job, and if you watch carefully there are some pretend needles that are meant to go into the guy's head that they push down. So unlike the later artificial reality that we see in later episodes where the guys do wear a helmet but it's more just something they look into and have gloves and groinal attachments to be able to feel and interact with the game, this one is plugging directly into their minds. Now, before I continue, I must address the novels. Infinity welcomes careful drivers and, of course, the novel sharing the same name as the episode, Better Than Life. Both of these novels feature the game Better Than Life very prominently as a real key point of the plot. But before I go too far talking about the books, I'd like to take a second just to ask you to hit like if you're enjoying this video, and why not hit subscribe if you want to see more like this in the future. Now, a full breakdown of the novels won't be possible here, but what I will say is that in the books, Better Than Life is a much more sinister second generation version of the game. Once you put on the headset, you become a game head. Once it's on, you won't even remember starting a game and won't realise you're in a game, and that's where it becomes pretty sinister. So you don't know that you're in a game and just think you're living an amazing life. In the real world, those game heads are kind of a mix between like a zombie walking around and a junkie, and without care you'd soon become malnourished and gaunt and simply fade away and die. Trying to yank off somebody's headset will just instantly kill them, so the only way to get out of the game is to want to leave the game, but you don't know you're in one. It's an amazing fantasy world, so why would you want to leave? It's really sinister. Go check out the books if you want to know more. They're quite different to this story here, but it's interesting to compare the two a little bit. Anyhow, back to the episodes. With the helmets now on, the guys go into a bit of a trance and all the screens in the drive room change to show that Better Than Life has loaded up. The guys then appear in what must be like a loading screen, going through lots of doorways and cool looking futuristic sets. And while they're going through here, it's hard to spot and easy to miss. Rimmer's H has disappeared off his head, so while he's in Better Than Life, he can live like a normal living person. Anyhow, they continue on through all the futuristic loading screens and eventually, quite comically, go through a doorway and pop out on a really normal looking beach. Now, this was meant to be paradise, an amazing, super hot, red hot beach, lovely place to be, absolute paradise, except they had to film this in Wales on real beach in May when it was freezing cold and really windy. And you can kind of see that, especially if you're watching the original versions. The sand just looks really brown, the sky looks just really dull, the sea even looks kind of brown. It really doesn't quite look like the paradise they were hoping for. They did try and fix this in the remastered versions. Everything's a lot brighter, but you can tell that that's 1990s colour correction because it just doesn't look quite right. Like when Marilyn Monroe goes past, her face is very orange and it just looks a bit weird. So as mentioned, they meet Marilyn Monroe, they meet Napoleon and the game's host, played by Tony Hawks, who was the comedian, the warm-up comedian for Red Dwarf, who played loads of small parts throughout the years. Tony Hawks' character, the game host, invites them to a restaurant that's a couple of miles up the beach, and the guys want to know how they can get there. His character simply says, it's better than life. You can get there any way you want. So Lister and Kat imagine a Harley Davidson, jump on it and roar off down the beach, whereas Rimmer has a little bit of struggle with his imagination, starting with a freewheeler before eventually managing to get himself a lovely E-Type. Inside the car, his ex-lover, well, that might be an exaggeration, his 12-minute lover, Yvonne Magruder, appears and they kind of flirt for a little while, and before he can roar off down the beach himself, something needs to make it perfect. Some fluffy dice just to lower the taste level of that lovely E-Type. Now it's quite funny, the E-Type has a story itself in that they got it on the beach, filmed everything they needed to film, except they couldn't quite get it off the beach. So it kind of got bogged down, so they sent a Range Rover of some sort to get it pulled out. That also got bogged down in the sand, and a little bit of a panic was setting in, but I think they eventually got everything shifted. And as for Yvonne Magruder appearing, played by Judy Hawkins, this is the one and only time we've ever seen Yvonne Magruder on screen. She got a prominent role in the novel Last Human, but as for on screen, this is all we ever see of her. Which is a bit of a shame because in Series 8 all the crew was revived. They could have easily shown her on screen, and they did mention her. Rimmer talked about her, but you never saw her.
Right now, Yvonne Magruder is sleeping off the first 23 pages of the Kama Sutra.
Kind of a missed opportunity. It might have been fun to see her again and have her interact with Rimmer. Next, we join the boys in the restaurant. Now, this was a real restaurant which refused to close while the guys were filming. So you had all these guys in bizarre costumes and all this strangeness going on, alongside some people eating for real in the restaurant. They must have really wondered what was going on. The guys order some outrageous looking food with ridiculously big cocktails and whatnot, and the cat even tucks into some live fish in a fish tank. And we get a little rendition of I'm Gonna Eat You Little Fishy that we've heard in previous episodes. It's interesting to see that in this sci-fi show that refuses to ever have aliens, sat behind Lister is a bunch of people who look very alien to me. They've got entirely blue skin and really strange clothes and bald heads. They look very alien to me, so maybe it's in Better Than Life they've imagined aliens so it has to make them, or is this just like some super weird high fashion from the future where the fashionable thing is to be really painted blue? Who knows? Just a bit bizarre. This is about the closest you're going to get to aliens in Red Dwarf. Rimmer eventually arrives, having been busy with Yvonne, and the guys talk about their hotel rooms. Lister and Kat have already checked into theirs, and they're ideal. They're exactly what they want, with the cats being so huge it's almost on a global scale with his wardrobe. We hear something similar to all of this in the episode from season 6, Legion, where the guys get rooms that are tailored to them.
2 dozen 8-packs and a spare pair of sneakers in the icebox. Faultless, not an inch wasted.
Before long, somebody starts calling out for Admiral Rimmer, which Arnold doesn't realise means him, until a fresh Admiral's uniform pops onto him and he realises, hey, it's better than life. Sitting with a bunch of officers, he seems to be the flavour of the month despite telling a terrible joke. They all laugh. A cadet comes up to him and wants him to sign his wonderful book. It's all going swimmingly, and then his father arrives, and it seems like he's going to tell him that he's proud of him. Until he says that he's a complete smeghead, and it turns out to be that this is part of the cat's fantasy. And it's an interesting hint that other people within the game, their fantasies can negatively affect yours. An interesting hint of that. And also, when the cat says that it's his fantasy, or he says it's mine, he looks directly at the camera. kind of breaking the fourth wall, something that he's more famous for doing in the episode Parallel Universe, when he meets the dog. He's more famous for that moment, but he seems to be breaking the fourth wall here as well.
I don't know what that is, but I'm sure he wants to eat me.
What? This isn't my fantasy?
No, it's mine.
The next scene is Lister and the cat having fun on a golf course. They come across Marilyn Monroe. They sort of walk along, and just as Lister wants a drink because he's thirsty, the game host appears with an amazing cocktail. They meet up with Holly and chat with him. He's in a kind of remote thing, like a little box that he can drive around on. This was built specially for the episode and used a lot in the later episode Queeg. They also come across the cat's other girlfriend, Miranda, who's a mermaid, but kind of a backwards mermaid. It's all a bit weird, but hey, if the cat's happy, then it suits him better than life. Now, this was actually the second time they shot this scene. Originally, it was meant to be on the beach in a little paradise setup, but it was so cold, so overcast, and so windy that the scene just came out terrible. It looked like they were sat in a hurricane. Guys were like visibly shivering in the scene. You can go watch it, go look for the deleted scene for this one. It's really interesting, almost the same dialogue, but the guys just look so unhappy. I think they definitely made the right decision reshooting this on the golf course. We then see Rimmer out for a drive with Yvonne, who's now Yvonne Rimmer, having married the night before, and their 7 children who have just appeared throughout the day. The children are really unruly, running around screaming. Rimmer and his wife are screaming at each other. It just looks like a really unpleasant sort of scene. He's managed to fantasize, as Lister says, you've fantasized having kids and a mortgage. It's just a really fun take on kind of being careful what you wish for. Rimmer then kind of admits that his brain has rebelled and won't accept him having nice things. He suddenly looks really disheveled, he's got missing teeth, and he's literally hit the bottle straight away. And as if things couldn't get any worse, at the exact moment that Arnold becomes all disheveled and depressed, his H reappears on his head. We also have a tax collector for the Outland revenue mentioned earlier turn up wanting his £18,000 from Rimmer. The other guys check their pockets wanting to just give him the money for it, but Rimmer has managed to wish away all their money. So we're seeing, a bit like the cat earlier, one person's fantasy can affect another. Next thing, a tarantula is crawling up his trouser leg. Everything's going wrong. Within a moment, everyone, including Holly, are all buried up to their necks in sand, smeared with honey, and killer ants are on the way. It's all gone terribly wrong. And this was actually filmed by having the guys kneel in a hole, put a wooden board that was shaped around their necks over them, and then covered a wooden board with sand. And you could kind of see that moving a little bit, particularly when Rimmer's having to shout. You can see the sand around him moving as the board moves. But actually, overall, it looks really good. I think they look exactly like they were buried alive. With a scream, the guys emerge back in the drive room, take off their helmets, and proceed to go back to the bunk room, all annoyed that Better Than Life was ruined by Rimmer. Along the way, Lister reads out a letter which was saying that Rimmer has been promoted to an officer. Until the tax collector jumps out of a wardrobe and they realise they're still in the game. Tax collector grabs Rimmer by the arm and proceeds to hammer his hand. Pretty harsh, but that's how the show ends, with the words "game over" on screen. Now, the ending is actually pretty clever when you re-watch it a few times. The guys emerge from the game, but you'll see Better Than Life is still on all the monitors in the drive room, kind of a hint that the game is still running. The letter that Lister reads about Rimmer being promoted is just magically in front of Lister when he takes off the helmet, so kind of a hint that something's not real. There's a few of these little hints in there, and there's a hint that's less obvious. The guys have been in the game for 24 hours at least. Rimmer talked about last night I had to get married, and this morning the kids, so we know they've been in there for at least a day. But they don't seem to be hungry, they don't seem to be tired, and they haven't like wet themselves or anything after a full day. It's kind of a subtle clue something's not right. And again, if you go read the books, coming out of Better Than Life in a not very good state is definitely something that was covered in the novels. The guys were like completely emaciated in the novel. So Better Than Life, a really interesting episode, inspired 2 novels and inspired a lot of later episodes with the AR suites that they come across later, where we have episodes like Gunman of the Apocalypse and episodes where they visit places like Pride and Prejudice Land in season 7. And of course, they imagine an artificial reality suite in the episode Back to Reality. So this one definitely inspired a lot of later stuff. So guys, what do you think of this episode? It's a really strong one for me. I really like it. I quite like some of these unusual episodes that have a lot of stuff filmed away from the studio. They're just interesting. And I really like this one. I think it has a lot of good comedy in there. Some great tender moments. That stuff in the observation dome is really good. I really like that. It's a great episode. I really enjoy it. Some good sci-fi in there as well. What do you guys think? What do you like in this episode? Tell me your favourite bit down below. Guys, thank you so much for watching another one of these episode breakdowns. Got more coming all the time, so don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. Give us a like if you've enjoyed it. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time, Smegheads.